one of the themes that had written down was the role of traditional school and academics and like job training, the role that that plays in the unfolding of our lives and of our careers. So, if you remember Craig, he left school at the earliest possible time that he could, which was 16 at that age when it
Hmm.
was legally allowed to do that.
Hmm.
And he made several mistakes over his life, clearly. And he got lucky several times. I think we both acknowledge that. Um, but to me, this book feels like a constant evolution or road of self discovery for him,
Yeah.
which is sometimes there's all these huge obstacles in his way, and other times he kind of lands on success. But I thought it was interesting how so his school, he talks about school in Scotland and the way that you have to be in order to survive in school in Scotland. And his mom even says something like, I think you got in trouble because you have a loud voice. And so if you think about it, he had to dumb down or uh, mute who he was in order to survive in the school environment.
Hmm.
And I feel like although this is, we're talking about kind of Scotland and it's a very, very different backdrop, but I wonder how that relates to just school and academics in general and how we kind of learn and we're sort of like forced, like you said, to consider the one path we want to take or to learn certain things in certain ways instead of focusing as much. It's almost like we do that at the expense of self-discovery. And that might also be me because growing up Indian, like I definitely had that, we talked about it in previous episode where it's sort of like you have to do one of these paths and, there's little room for deviation from that.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of embarking on this self-discovery a little bit later and like really trying to do justice to it. But I feel
Hmm.
like for him, he pretty much always, whether good or bad, was 100% authentic to himself. Where
Yeah.
if he felt like being a drummer, he became a drummer. If he felt like, doing drugs and getting in a rock and roll band, he did that. If he felt like
Hmm.
leaving school, he did that. If he felt like trying stand up comedy, he did that. Like he did what
He
he
didn't
followed
half-ass
through
it.
with what he wanted. Yeah, yeah. Um, what are your thoughts on there and sort of like that in general and the role of like school and academics and how exactly what you were talking about where we're sort of taught to you have to decide one thing and then that's kind of what you stick to.
Well, I wonder if because if that's the way it is, and we are forced to kind of mute ourselves or nerf ourselves down a little bit in order to survive. I wonder if the moment he let it's like going to college. When kids go to college, they let loose. So I
Yeah.
wonder if since he left school at such a young age, he had this earlier version of letting loose and just allowing his character to push him always and for the rest of And I even wrote that down as like
Oh.
I think there's a really cool skill to how having people like you, even if you're a dick. Like
Mm.
even if you can be like you can be one of the worst, like make the worst decisions in life. The ability to still have people vouch for you and stop for you and take time for you is a skill in and of itself.
Which he
And
did.
I
He
think a
had
lot
that
of
guy take him to rehab and pay for it. I don't
Yeah,
even know if that.
exactly, and that's what I mean. And honestly, even so, like, homie cheated on almost every one of his girlfriends or wives, and even still, after rehab, he was able to go back and make amends with most of these people. Like, that's impressive to know that, like, even after all of that, there was still so much respect for him as a person. That like these mistakes that he's made, whether they were huge or not, there was still this feeling of like respect to the character of who he was. And I think that kind of drove him always
Mm.
because he was always, like you said, he detached himself from whatever he like was in that moment. And it was more just, he was always true to himself. And that allowed people to connect to him a little bit better they would have if he was suppressing any of that. So I think that was like
That's
that's kind
really
of the point
interesting.
I took of that. Yeah.